Picture a cramped field office. The AC is rattling in the window, fighting that heavy Florida heat. A couple of ecologists are huddled around a glowing laptop screen, just doing the usual grunt work. They're scrolling through thousands of hours of boring trail camera footage. Usually it's just mud, wind blowing through the sawgrass, or maybe a passing heron. Then they open a file recorded deep inside the Big Cypress National Preserve. So hey race, what happened? They hit play on a totally random trail camera clip, and the entire room just went dead silent. Nobody said a word. Not a single sound. And it wasn't because the video was bloody or showed some brutal animal attack. It was because they realized what those 30 seconds of blurry, green-tinted video actually meant. You see, for the last 20 years, the scientific community basically accepted a very dark reality. We all thought we knew how this whole thing was going to end. I mean, you've probably heard the story 100 times. The Burmese pythons invaded Florida, they absolutely wrecked the ecosystem, and completely wiped out almost all of the mammals. The swamp just went quiet. We literally wrote off the native mammals as collateral damage, packed up our hopes, and just tried to manage the disaster. We threw millions of dollars at the problem. State and federal agencies brought in the heavy artillery. We used thermal drones to scan the sawgrass at night. We surgically implanted GPS trackers into male pythons, hoping they would lead us right back to the breeding females. Florida even set up programs paying professional bounty hunters to trek through the waist-deep muck and drag these massive snakes out by hand. But hey race, the problem. None of it worked. You simply can't out-hunt a predator that perfectly camouflages into the mud, can survive without eating for months, and breeds by the dozens. Human intervention completely failed. The pythons won. And for the last decade, we literally just got used to an Everglades where the native mammals were gone. And that's exactly why this new footage from Big Cypress breaks every rule we thought we understood. Before we look at exactly what that camera captured, you have to understand just how bad things actually got out there. Because to fully grasp why those researchers were sitting in absolute silence, you need to realize the sheer scale of our failure. Back in 2012, a major field study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Researchers had been conducting road surveys through the Everglades for over a decade, counting the native animals they saw. And the numbers they published were completely devastating. 3%, 9%, 5%. Entire food webs were entirely wiped out. But hey race, the thing. When human intervention completely failed, we basically assumed the story was over. We forgot that nature doesn't just read our statistics and give up. So hey race, what happened on that tape? The footage starts deep in the brush of the Big Cypress Preserve. A motion sensor gets tripped and the camera clicks on. The screen is dark and grainy. Right in the center of the frame, you see a massive female Burmese python. She is tightly coiled up over a huge clutch of eggs. Honestly, it's exactly what you'd expect. An apex predator sitting in the mud, guarding the next generation of monsters. But watch the edge of the screen. A bobcat wanders into the shot. Now, think back to those numbers from a few minutes ago. Bobcats were absolutely decimated, nearly wiped off the map. The only reason any of them are still alive today is because they learned to run away. That was the absolute rule of the swamp. You see a python, you run. But this bobcat doesn't run. It spots the snake. It sees the nest, and it just walks right up to it. The python is sitting right there, completely capable of wrapping this cat up and crushing it in seconds. This might work for you or me in an action movie, but in a real swamp, that's usually a fast death sentence. Native mammals do not pick fights with 15-foot pythons. Yet the bobcat just starts eating the eggs. It is casually stealing a meal right from under the heaviest hitter in the Everglades. And when the giant snake finally lunges out to strike and defend its nest, the bobcat doesn't panic. It doesn't flee. It swats back. It literally throws hands with a snake big enough to swallow a deer. It treats this unstoppable, invasive killing machine like a minor annoyance. And that's why the ecologists watching this video stopped talking. Because this wasn't just a lucky encounter. Here is a native mammal, actively engaging the very thing that destroyed its entire species, and holding its ground. It completely shatters the timeline we believed in. Because if the prey is no longer running away, it means the entire food chain just flipped. You watch that bobcat swatting at a monster, and it's easy to think it's just one crazy cat that lost its mind. Just a weird, isolated incident. But here's the thing. Nature doesn't just sit around and take a beating forever. What we are actually watching on that trail camera is a massive biological shift. Scientists call this behavioral plasticity, or rapid evolutionary adaptation. Here's how it works in plain English. The mammals that were careless, the ones that looked at a massive Burmese python and just treated it like another harmless, everyday snake, well, they died 20 years ago. They got eaten, plain and simple. They didn't get the chance to pass on their genes. So the only animals left in that swamp today, they are the deeply paranoid ones, the survivors. And they are aggressively passing that survival data down to their offspring. And we actually have the receipts for this. Recent field studies by ecologists specifically tracking small native prey like rodents found something absolutely wild. For years, these local animals had no evolutionary context for these giant snakes. They didn't know what a python smelled like, so they would just blindly wander right into an ambush. But here's what we found when looking at the latest data. The newest generations are actually starting to recognize the chemical scent of a python. It triggers an alarm now. They smell that specific predator, and their behavior completely changes. They avoid the area, they stay on high alert. They adapt. It took a couple of brutal, unforgiving decades. Millions of animals had to die for this to happen. But the ecosystem is finally learning how to fight back. The native species are mapping the threat. Basically, the software of the swamp is updating in real time. And that's why it matters. You'd honestly think the scientists sitting in that sweaty little field office would be thrilled. A native bobcat finally throwing a punch? That's the good news we've been waiting 2 decades for, right? But here's the problem. They aren't celebrating. Nobody is popping champagne, because they know exactly what this means. If native animals are actively rewriting their behavior, risking everything to fight a 15-foot snake just to steal a meal, the Everglades isn't returning to normal. That old version of the swamp, the one we had 20 years ago, is just gone, dead. Instead, it's evolving into something completely new, a totally different ecosystem. And here's the thing. We have absolutely zero control over this. For years, humans tried to fix the python problem with traps, bounties, and expensive tech. We failed. We dropped a super predator into a delicate environment and completely broke the machine. Now, the machine is fixing itself, but it's doing it in the dark. So the big question isn't really whether the Burmese pythons are going to wipe out Florida anymore. Nature always pushes back eventually. The really unsettling thing, the question that nobody in that lab actually knows the answer to yet, is this. If the native wildlife has to radically evolve just to survive living alongside a literal monster, what kind of monsters are we accidentally forcing them to become?